Hey everyone, Richard here. Today we're going to be covering the Drak 25, another weapon included in the Rival Incursion update for Deep Rock Galactic. Similar to the other weapons featured in this update, the Drak is unlocked via a unique mission assignment and requires a minimum level 20 scout to select. The Drak 25, also known as the Plasma Carbine or similar, is a unique weapon for the scout for a number of reasons. First, it lacks a detachable magazine, meaning it feeds from a single ammo pool and can overheat if fired too long, much like the minigun on the Gunner class. Second, it is geared less as a long-range or precision weapon compared to the GK2 and especially the M1000. However, there are upgrades and builds that can address this. In essence, the Plasma Carbine fires small plasma projectiles that travel at slow speed compared to other traditional ballistic firearms. The Drak 25 generates heat with every shot until it will eventually overheat unless you cease firing, or the weapon is manually heat dumped using the Tier 5 upgrade, also called manual heat dump. This, in a roundabout way, gives it similar penalties to magazine-fed weapons in that you will have to pause from firing to either let your weapon cool down as normal or recover from a total overheat. The advantage the Drak provides is that as long as you don't constantly overheat, you'll likely have way more weapon uptime compared to the GK2 and M1K. By default, the Carbine deals pretty low damage compared to its counterparts, with each shot hitting for 9 damage. This means it will not have enough power to kill swarmers with a single shot unless you're playing on hazard level 1. While this sounds like a pretty large nail in the Carbine's coffin, its stats in totality paint a much different picture. Most importantly is its fire rate, which is the second highest in the game, only beaten by the minigun. Out of the box, it fires at 780 rounds per minute or 13 shots per second. This gives you a short-term damage per second of around 117 by default, surpassing the GK2, although beaten by the M1000's insane DPS of 220. Keep in mind though, if you manage the Drak's heat, you will have considerably more uptime versus the M1000, meaning long-term DPS will be much higher. Total ammo capacity is also much higher than the other Scout primaries, with a battery holding 800 shots by default. 800 rounds dealing 9 damage per shot comes out to around 7,200 total damage, which compares very favorably to the GK2's roughly 5,600. Another important and sort of hidden stat is the Drak's 100% armor break bonus. This makes it good at stripping away creatures with light and heavy armor like Glyphid Guards and Praetorians. The Drak's heat mechanics are initially obscure, however, they're fairly simple to understand and are worth the time to review, since it will make understanding upgrades and overclocks much easier. First, the Carbine has a heat meter that ranges from 0 to 2 and increases by default by 0.05 per shot. The Drak will not start shedding heat until you cease firing for 0.3 seconds. This means after 45 shots, the weapon will reach 2 on the heat meter or 100% and will then overheat and be inoperable for 2.5 seconds by default. Surpassing 50% heat is needed to initiate one of the upgrades, manual heat dump, and is activated by hitting your reload key. It's important to note that the heat bar is not linear, so to achieve the actual 50% heat threshold on the meter, you only need to fire 18 shots, not 23. If you are close to 100% heat, using manual heat dump can allow you to quickly cool the weapon down, and can also trigger some unique effects based on certain overclocks. Overall, managing heat is an important skill for using the Carbine and will allow you to take full advantage of the weapon's strengths. I may have made it seem like overheating the weapon is always bad, and in most cases it is, yes. However, with certain overclocks and upgrades, it can actually work in your favor. Aggressive venting and rewiring mod almost mandate that you overheat the Drak regularly, or else you're essentially wasting an overclock slot. Conversely, overclocks like thermal exhaust feedback and shield battery booster require you to be very diligent with keeping your heat subcritical. Thermal exhaust will punish you with a much longer overheat time, while shield battery booster will have similar effects in addition to draining your shields. The underlying point is that when making a weapon build with the Drak, decide ahead of time whether you want frequent overheats to be desired or not. On that note, I will be providing 2 builds, alike in dignity, that will showcase both sides of the proverbial coin, to overheat or to not. The first build will revolve around using the aggressive venting overclock. This will create an area of effect blast dealing at max 6 fire damage, 60 points of heat, and 500 points of fear within a 5 meter radius. This comes at the cost of 160 less battery capacity and a cooling rate reduction of around 30%, which can actually work in your favor if you want to maintain high heat. For our build, we will be using high volume plasma field, increasing our fire rate by 180 rounds per minute, bringing the total to 960. The higher fire rate will build heat quicker, but also give us a higher short-term DPS, and making the Drak devastating at close and medium range. Our next upgrade will be increased particle density, increasing the base damage from 9 to 11, making the Carbine hit much harder. While the larger battery does give you more total damage than increasing the damage by 2, the higher DPS more than compensates for this. At tier 3, Hot Feet will grant us a temporary speed boost during overheats, giving us roughly 2.5 seconds of higher speed. The idea behind this is that in dire situations you will often overheat, and the blast, in addition to the speed boost, will give you plenty of room to get out of any quagmire. At tier 4, Plasma Splash and Overcharged Plasma Containment Field are both viable. Splash damage will make the Drak much more effective against swarmers and tight groups of grunts. Overcharge, on the other hand, can slow enemies down and deal electrical damage, 48 damage total over 4 seconds, making it very effective against Mactera and rival tech. Finally, for the last tier of upgrade, using manual heat dump will allow you to force the weapon into overheat mode, given its heat is past 50% on the meter. This will also trigger your AoE effect from the overclock, although the damage does scale with heat percentage, meaning at 50% it will deal 3 damage, 30 points of heat, and 250 points of fear. Our second build will revolve around the Shield Battery Booster Overclock. This one will be a little bit harder to use since it requires you to maintain full shields to gain most of the perks. This overclock will increase base damage by over 60% and double projectile speed at max shield. It will also increase ammo capacity by 50 shots and slightly increase rate of fire. However, this does come at the cost of a significantly longer overheat time, higher heat per shot, and if you do happen to overheat, your shields will go to 0 and you will have to wait for them to fully recharge. In essence, this overclock provides high risk and high reward gameplay for the scout. For our upgrades, we will be focusing on keeping the weapon from overheating while dealing as much damage as possible. For tier 1, we will be using improved thermals, taking the edge off the heat penalty from this overclock and allowing for longer, sustained periods of firing. While in my previous video on the Hurricane, I did say not to fight the drawbacks of unstable overclocks, this overclock, in my opinion, warrants exception to that rule. Next, increased particle density will give us more stopping power and allow us to fully embrace the high damage of this build. Taking larger battery isn't a bad choice either, but leaning into the higher damage makes more sense for the theme of this build and will let you take down larger threats quickly. At tier 3, upgrading to the Gen 2 cooling system will help blunt some of the penalties from the overclock and also reduce the cooling delay to 0.2 seconds. Alternatively, custom coil alignment works well since you already have a higher muzzle velocity from the overclock. Do not, however, take Hot Feet since we absolutely do not want to be overheating in this build. Moving on, I found that I had decent luck using Plasma Blast since it does help deal with swarmers and groups of enemies. Overcharged PCF is also good for single targets or when fighting rival tech since it deals electrical damage and can slow enemies by 80%. Finally, for our last upgrade, it's an easy one. Thermal Feedback Loop increases your fire rate significantly past 50% heat to a maximum of 1200 rounds per minute. Do not take manual heat dump. Using the reload function will instantly drop your shields, leaving you extremely vulnerable and without the overclock bonuses. For secondary weapons, for either build, the Scout is pretty flexible. However, I am very biased towards the Boomstick with the special powder overclock. Not only is it a great tool for killing enemies, but it can also get you out of the middle of a horde of enemies or save you from taking fall damage. Grenade choice is going to depend on mission type, biome, and team composition. Generally, IFGs are the safe option since cryo grenades and pheromones lose some of their value on elimination and sabotage missions. However, cryo grenades are incredibly useful at dealing with Praetorians, Mactera, and NATO-type breeders. They're also great at buying a few seconds of time if you become overwhelmed with enemies. For perks, this takes a little bit of consideration, and you also have to factor in what build you want to use. Shield Link, for example, becomes very useful with the Shield Battery Booster Overclock since it will give you much faster shield recharge when you're near teammates. Field Medic is always handy for scouts since they often act as medics thanks to their very high mobility and ease of access to far-off sections of a cave system. Elemental Protection is also another good passive perk, as a lot of damage taken from enemies or the environment will be classed as elemental damage. The Drak 25's high total damage, fast firing rate, and lack of reloading makes it a powerful weapon in the hands of an experienced scout. But failure to understand the downsides of the weapon, such as the overheat mechanics, relatively slow muzzle velocity, and low per shot damage will make using it very frustrating. Overall, understanding the underlying mechanics behind the Drak and using them to your advantage will be your biggest challenge. With that, you will have a very powerful weapon at your disposal, outperforming the other scout weapons in many cases if in the right hands. That being said, I know I haven't covered all the possibilities of builds in this video, so if you have any or have any tips, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Thank you again everyone for watching. Check out my weekly deep dive streams every Friday at 5:30 p.m. Central Time if you want more Deep Rock content. Join me next time when we will be covering the Lock 1 Smart Rifle, but until then, happy hunting!